Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, first I'd like to apologize. Okay, in my last video, I wasn't really aware that my house has a major echo. Okay, and so the sound quality was just terrible. And I plan to redo at least one of those two videos, the last two. I just work a lot, and I just don't know if I have a lot of time. So, but I do intend to redo those videos, and I really do apologize. This house has some weird acoustics, and I just, I'm just very busy, and I just, anyway, bottom line, these videos are only for people that struggle with cluster B issues or cluster B adjacent issues, like say anger management, or maybe even on the verge of like addictions or anything like that. Okay, so, it's not like I'm trying to reach the general public, but I really want to reach out to people who are struggling with these issues or similar issues. Okay, now in today's video, I really want to continue challenging some of the orthodoxies about NPD. And I guess the theme for this video basically is I really want to challenge the idea that cluster B disorders are actually mental illnesses. Okay. Now, I know they are conditions. Okay, there's no doubt that a cluster B disorder is a mental condition. Okay, I have no doubt. I mean, I have the disorder myself, so it is a condition. But I want to be careful about saying the word mental illness. Okay, mental illness. Okay, I think we can all agree that severe, spontaneous, manic depressive illness, or like say bipolar, like severe, and we've all maybe some of us have actually seen people with that illness. Okay, they lose touch with reality completely. These are people that are just I mean, you could almost say they're brain damaged, or let's say severe, schizophrenia or something like that. Somebody who's just plain crazy. Okay. Um, Now, I have no problem saying that those are mental illnesses, because I mean that is so extreme that it's really at the point of being almost neurological, really neurological, and no psychologist can talk therapy a person out of actually a true mental illness. Okay, that is, it is completely unreachable through talking and reasoning. Okay, so I think this whole tradition we have in psychology, the idea that we can sort of reason and talk and sort of introspect our way through these conditions, I think we really should be careful to avoid, I believe, presuming that we're talking about real mental illness. Okay, I don't think sickness is really the word. I think it is a condition, and I think we really need to think about what's involved in these conditions and what could be required to get out of these conditions. Okay, now I am very critical of psychology. Okay, because like say, let's take the analogy to like say diabetes, some heart disease, and let's say maybe some physical illnesses that in the nature of let's say diabetes. That's a typical analogy, or even mild heart disease. Um, yes, if you have a very serious diabetes, okay, you will have to take some kind of medication. Okay, there's no question about it. But I think we can all understand that there is kind of a percentage, sort of like a range, a spectrum, let's say in diabetes, where you kind of have like say a mild borderline condition or a mild condition, where in reality, getting a lot of changing your diet and getting good exercise can make a huge difference. Okay, and the same with heart disease. People who are beginning to get early stage heart disease many times, not always, by really changing their diet and really focusing on exercise, they can really get a lot better. And in today's world, between heart disease and diabetes, that's a huge percentage of the kind of illnesses that are really, really affecting mortality. In a lot of, let's say, in first world countries, in developed consumer countries. Okay, not so much in third world countries, but it depends, because even in third world countries, some people really do, become obese. But it's really kind of a first world problem. In any case, what I think is interesting is that for this big chunk of physical problems, okay, it turns out that one of the very best things you can do for your body is physical fitness. Okay, physical fitness, sort of on the level of like kind of almost like an athletic, sort of in the athletic neighborhood. Okay, and so, in other words, being in good shape physically and having kind of an athletic attitude and an athletic way of living, okay, that really takes care of a big percentage of physical issues. I mean, pretty big percentage, okay? And why is it that when I look at the let's say the culture of psychology and therapy, why do I really struggle to see a clear analogy between the world that I see in therapy today and the world I see, let's say, in athletics and physical fitness? Why is it that it, I see almost nothing similar between the environment of therapy and psychology as it is today, and the subculture of psychology and the subculture of fitness, physical fitness? I don't see it. If somebody can find it for me, I think they're going to have to really struggle to rescue that analogy because I don't see it at all. I see the world of psychotherapy as being more kind of a let's go back to infancy. Let's go back to the just the basic cuddly intimacy, and it's kind of like this weird emphasis on emotionality, and really not much of an emphasis on being more robust. And I think a lot of psychologists would say that if an NPD person like me starts emphasizing things like competence and being robust and strong, that's going to be all narcissistic talk, and that's not legitimate. That it's much more legitimate to just be vulnerable and just to be weaker and just kind of undefended. um, and so I'm just going to go ahead and say I agree with the undefended part. Part of our journey is not to be compulsively defensive. Okay, so I agree with that, but I really am concerned about really the absence. I think of what I see in psychology, the real absence of any good analogy or any good, anything in psychology that could be almost like analogous to, like, say, physical fitness and getting stronger and our developing our fortitude as people. Okay, because I really think that what's missing in cluster B people is a certain kind of fortitude. Now, I don't mean direct strength. I mean more like on the level of like the marathon strength, the marathon runner, the endurance, okay? Endurance and tolerance of, let's say, discomfort, let's say, just living with, just bearing the burden of, let's say, just the dissonances and the discomforts of life, okay? So, I think that's missing. I think it's missing, and I think it's a problem. Okay, so if I were to look at, let's say, personally, wanting to get better from a cluster B perspective, I would say we have to look at ourselves as deconditioned people, or people who never have been conditioned, and we have to be willing to take on the possibility of adopting some belief systems and putting them into practice through conditioning. Okay, so the only place where I see that, or even something close to that, is in drug addictions recovery. But I would say even they don't really have the emphasis that I would want to put on really conditioning, targeted conditioning towards being able to endure and tolerate more discomfort and bear more burden of just the basic dissonances of life. Okay, so even drug addiction recovery doesn't have quite the emphasis that I think we need to be looking at. Okay, so with that introduction, okay, I would like to propose that we need to look more closely, not just how cluster B is similar to addictions, okay, but how cluster B is in many ways very similar to what we see in immature politics. Okay, immature politics. When people take on very cartoonish ideologies, okay, I think that is very close to what's happening at a very basic level in cluster B disorders, especially narcissism, because I think a lot of narcissism really is kind of like the early and just over rigid adoption of very, very cartoonish, almost ideologies, almost beliefs. Okay, and I think we even see that with BPD. Okay, I'm gonna kind of challenge the orthodoxy and suggest that even BPD does involve the adoption of a very problematic, kind of almost like belief system. Okay, and basically, I'd like to suggest that the very bottom base level, okay, of both BPD and NPD is not actually anything about self-esteem or anything about, like, say, status, like my status, like being connected to other people. Okay, I would say that even below that, okay, below that, much deeper, is an intolerance and an unwillingness to sort of admit, the value of taking on burden. Okay, in other words, it's like a rejection of burden. Burden, burden. Sorry, I don't speak very well, but I'm talking about like the burdens of life. Okay, and I think that that to me, I think is what I really see as the core, okay, of these cluster B disorders, especially narcissism and BPD. It's sort of like, it's almost like a constitution, almost like a belief system, almost like an ideology that we start forming without even realizing it, like a proto ideology that we do not sort of admit the validity, and we don't admit the possible goodness or the possible benefit. Okay, it's almost like it doesn't appear to us as a possible positive. Okay, the idea of living an enduring burden. Okay, we may take on burdens temporarily, and we may use that to sort of manipulate other people. But the idea of having an enduring burden, that our burden is enduring, that burden is, let's say, in the end, a beneficial state. Okay. Um, I think that almost always what I'll see in NPD and BPD and the other cluster Bs is almost like a fundamental constitutional belief system. It's like a proto belief system that we adopt without even realizing it. We sort of form this belief that doesn't even admit the value or the possible value of a state of enduring burden as a possible a positive way of living that might have like productive outcome. Okay, so and then there is the other part of NPD and BPD is that a lot of times we get into positions and then we get into that strange psychological thing of being egosyntonic, where we justify our position. Okay, in other words, whatever our position is, we feel justified in our position and very rigidly justified. So it's a very strong lack of flexibility. Um, and I do not want to look at that as mental illness because it's not like there's a part of our brain that's not working. Okay, we may have overactive certain parts of our brain. In other words, it may be that the way different parts of our brain communicate is maybe not ideal. But it's not like there's a part of our brain that's missing. Okay, there's not a part of the brain that's like the empathy organ in the brain. In other words, it's more like how the brain functions in its totality. Okay, how the different parts of the brain work together. Okay, so you might want to say it's almost about the politics inside the brain. Okay, and how we haven't learned, let's say, to manage those politics and the storms inside the brain. Now I'm not saying it's easy for us because if you have a difficult temperament, okay, if you have a difficult temperament, it will be harder to manage your brain. Okay, but it is interesting how I think that with people who have cluster B also have a belief system and really have like almost like a constitution and an ideology that doesn't even open the door to working on the brain. You know what I mean? It's almost like there's a kind of a rigidity in the belief that sort of prevents flexibility. And I don't think that deserves to be called mental illness. I think that's a condition. I think it's a behavioral condition, and I think it's an attitudinal condition. Okay, so now granted, I'm not suggesting it's easy to break these patterns because these are patterns. Okay, and some of these are very deep patterns. So not everybody's going to reach that point where they see the light and they're going to want to like deliver themselves and turn themselves over, let's say, to another way of thinking. Okay, but I do think we need to consider that what we're dealing with is not really truly a mental illness. Okay, what we're really dealing with is rigid behavioral patterns in the way we believe, in our attitudes, and in what we're open to. Okay, and what we're not open to. Okay, so what I see really big with NPD and BPD is really no openness whatsoever to the idea of a way of life that is enduring in the assumption of burdens. Okay, and the main burdens, I should say, the main burdens that I see for cluster B is assuming the burden of the dissonances of life. Okay, the things that present sort of in conflict form. How different angles, points of view on an issue can sort of present different ideas. Just taking on the fact that almost every issue that comes to us has different ways of looking at it. Okay, and that life is full of these dissonances. Okay, and we need to sort of like examine how easily we dispose of things by only seeing from one or two points of view and not seeing a broader, let's say, point of view on the different issues that present in our lives, and then taking on the burden of that, because it does burden a person, to be stuck, let's say, without a quick answer to something, especially a big deal, and the examples are infinite. I mean, in politics, we could point to, like, say, the war in Ukraine, or like, say, the U.S. policy with China and North Korea. Um, just those right there. Those are just three, easy, quick examples from politics, where if we really wanted to see all the competing points of view and really let that weigh on the table, okay, that really is kind of a burden, because I think instinctively we want kind of a quick resolution to that. But let's say in our personal lives, God, the examples are just infinite. They're just infinite. Like, oh, I notice that people tend to be rude to me. I notice that people don't seem to like me. Okay. Now, the first easy way to dispose of that is to say, well, gosh, these people must not be very open-minded. That I'm living around a bunch of closed-minded people. They don't have more enlightenment to know me better. They're not smart enough to know me better. Well, that's one way to look at it. But realistically, we know when we want to get that issue off the table that there may be other points of view on that issue to add some dissonance to that problem. For example, maybe I'm doing something that my chemistry is not sitting very well with other people. Maybe there's a reason why other people don't feel comfortable with me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. You know what I'm saying? I mean, deep down inside, we know that's a possibility, but we just sort of dispose the issue very quickly because we don't really want to lay down that weight and be burdened by all that uncertainty and the possibilities that may not be very flattering and very pleasant. you know. And then if it was true, let's say that I had some things about me that don't sit well with other people, well, then I have the burden of what am I going to do about it, you see? So I think if we're constitutionally kind of averse to having burden, we just want to get that off the table. You know what I mean? We just want to get that off the table because that's just an uneasy, uncomfortable, kind of heavy thing full of a bunch of dissonances and a bunch of possibilities that might signify just a lot of rigmarole that we don't want to deal with. Okay, and I would suggest that it's a very fundamental characteristic of people with cluster B disorders, almost as a belief system, almost as an ideology, that we do not admit ourselves to the possibility of having a long-term endurance, okay, of the weight of bearing, the dissonances and the burdens of our environment. Okay, so basically, if you wanted to shorthand it, it's just basically no openness to sort of long-term endurance, okay, of burden. So it's sort of like, it's just fundamentally not part of our constitution. Okay, so if that does become part of my life, okay, it's going to become part of my life because I'm going to adopt it into my constitution. You see what I mean? It'll be an adopted belief, not my own belief. Okay. So I believe that we need to be open to the possibility that maybe basically the whole structure of let's say a cluster B disorder is basically just sort of a collection of just very maladaptive ideologies that we've sort of developed without even realizing it. That every human being has their own, let's say, personal constitution and their own sort of ideologies or kind of almost like basic belief systems, okay? And that we have to be open to the fact that maybe we may need to sort of, accept that we have these belief systems, but sort of open ourselves up to more and maybe better belief systems and then go through a program of really turning ourselves over to a different way of living, and that slowly we can start to develop and train ourselves like an athlete, and become conditioned to maybe a more mature but higher burden way of living. Okay, as an enduring lifestyle, and that there's no reason to do this if it wasn't beneficial. Okay, so the idea is that we discover at some point, we come to believe that turning ourselves over to a more higher burden way of living is actually in the end going to be more beneficial to everybody, including including to us, but for everybody. Okay, so yeah, basically, I just want to leave everybody with my idea here that it's probably worth considering that most cluster B conditions really are just sort of examples of how we've developed sort of without thinking about it. We've developed sort of maladaptive sort of personal ideologies and personal constitutions. Okay, that are just very limited, very much limiting our the possibilities of our life, and that basically the door to recover from these cluster B conditions is just to open a lot of doors of possibility that have previously been closed, and that we basically are in a situation of closed doors. We want to open those doors, and we want to select and adopt, some new belief systems that may involve more more assumption of burden, and as an enduring way of living. Okay, knowing that in the end it's gonna produce more inside of us and also with other people. So yeah, if there's any attitude that's gonna really help with this, any analogy, I would say we need to take the analogy of somebody training to be an athlete. Okay, like say sports training. We really want to really develop ourselves and condition ourselves into a more honestly a more difficult way of living, but in the end a much more human way of living. Because as I've said before in other videos, as we take on more burden and as we hold more dissonance, we will metabolize that, and in that metabolic process will, I think, develop a lot of the aspects of us that would be recognizable as human heart. It's kind of like developing the heart. And the heart is only developed through a lot of burden assumption and the metabolization of the burdens of our environment. So I think just taking that on, I think it only makes sense to take it on with the spirit of an athlete or someone in athletic training. Okay, and just to take it on as a worthy cause, and just to kind of deliver ourselves to that, turn ourselves over to that, and to understand that it does involve sort of like say a set of acquired beliefs or adopted beliefs, and just like it's almost like the dialectic that we see in young people. When I was young, people would have a bad attitude towards adopted kids. That somehow it was better not to be adopted. Now that's a dialectical thing because different points of view. There's another point of view that says the most wonderful thing that a person can do is adopt somebody, and that's a very noble thing. And so there are different ways of looking at that, and while it might be nice to have organically, natural native belief system, that works in life, I may not have a native belief system or a native constitution that's really going to produce much in my life. Okay, I may have to operate with an adopted belief system or an adopted constitution, and that requires a little bit of a program because I have to really actually be committed and complying with it. So it does require that I sort of turn myself over, and I have sort of an awareness throughout the day and throughout the hours of the day, because sometimes I can revert back to old ways, but it's sort of a burden that we take on, and it's a worthy cause, and it's no different than someone training to be an athlete. They also have to take on maybe some practices and some training that may not be natural for them. But like them, we take it on because we know it's a worthy cause, and we know in the end we're becoming much more, and we're developing ourselves. So I think of it more in terms of personal development. You know, and I don't think there's any reason why we need to condemn ourselves and tell ourselves that there's no chance that we can develop. Okay, who says? If somebody says normal therapeutic methods don't work on cluster B, well, I think normal therapeutic methods are actually kind of namby-pamby, and they're not really that great. How often have we seen cluster B people really commit themselves to a structured sort of conditioning program? Okay, I would say that doesn't really exist that I can see. I can't see very much of that. So in other words, we should be open to that. And there's, and as long as we're not brain damaged, as long as we're not missing something in our brains, okay, we may have difficult brains, but there's nothing missing in our brains. So why not try? Why not just say, I'm going to put my faith in conditioning, and I'm going to adopt I'm going to adopt a belief system that assumes more burden, more environmental burden, more dissonance burden, okay, and I'm going to assume that environmental taxation, okay, and I'm going to take it on with the attitude of an athlete, somebody in athletic training, and I'm going to take it on with that attitude, um, and I'm not going to condemn myself and believe what anybody tells me that this is not fruitful or not worthwhile, because I think it really is. I think conditioning and training in the right context, under the right conditions, I think could be very helpful to us. And I think that below all the self-esteem crap and all the stuff that the BPD talks about, the status of wanting to be connected to people, I think if we go even deeper, and we look at the unwillingness to take on the burdens and the discomforts and the unease of life, okay, and if we go right there and start taking on more of the burden of life, okay, the discomfort, the nausea of maybe not knowing if we're connected to other people, maybe not knowing if we have good status, and taking on that burden in all the ways that it appears in our environment. I think that if we take it on with a athletic attitude of conditioning ourselves and really delivering ourselves to a different belief system. The belief system I have is delivering myself into the burden of enduring environmental taxation. So it's like enduring environmental taxation, okay, as a way of living that I know will be more productive, okay. And it's not my idea. I have adopted it, okay. And my program is to turn myself over to it throughout the day and every day as a way that I've chosen that I want to live my life, And it has to be a commitment. In cluster B, we can only make commitments. We can't just make decisions. We have to really be committed, and it has to be a renewed commitment throughout the day. So, basically, just challenging people. I think the mental illness theory, or the mental illness model, I think is just I would just say it's just a theory. Nobody can dissect a brain and find NPD in dissecting a brain. So it's just theory. We can't let ourselves get captivated by theories that may have political agenda, and they may have a vision of the human being that maybe is not the vision that really is most appropriate. So I would say be very careful with the orthodoxies, and also with what I say too. You don't have to believe what I say, but just try different things. And I really suggest conditioning and looking at this as a matter of conditioning, and looking at our current state as a collection of bad, maladaptive ideologies and sort of like constitution, like personal constitution, So, see it that way, and then be ready to open the door and try new things, because otherwise, if we're not willing to try new things and have new beliefs, then we really are condemned. Because how can we get better if we're not willing to modify our internal politics and our internal belief system? If we're not willing to change our internal beliefs, then okay, I agree, there's no hope. Because how are you going to change? I mean, how are you going to develop? So if we think we're self-aware, but we're closed to opening new doors and getting more flexible, well then, what good is that self-awareness? I mean, so I just leave this as an idea, and I do encourage anybody with cluster B to take on their life as a project of personal development, as though it were athletic training, and to really come up with an intelligent belief system to replace our existing belief systems. So thanks for watching, and I hope the echo is not too bad this time. Thank you very much.